thank you for coming. As I said, I was approached several months ago to speak at this conference, and that there would be breakout sessions. And since at the time I had just recently retired, they thought it might be useful to have a little breakout session on retirement. And so I reached the age of 71 when I retired. I'm 72 now. And all of a sudden, I've had reasonably good health for most of my life. I've never broken a bone in my body. I've had a couple of minor surgeries, but as soon as I retired from First Pres Columbia, all sorts of things started, including lower back pain and groans, and when you're getting up, and all of a sudden you realize, okay, I've reached that old stage. I've been retired 16 months. The church that I was in, that Sinclair Ferguson was in before me, and we overlapped for a couple of years, has over 3,000 members and a staff of, 50, 60 people, 48 elders. And I was the senior minister for 11 of the 13 years that I was there. And COVID kind of did a number on the church, as it did many other churches. And all of a sudden, everyone had an opinion about everything, and they wanted you to know what that opinion was, and that their opinion was the right opinion. And so I was ready to quit all of that. But I wasn't ready to stop preaching. So in a sense, I've only just begun. I'm just giving sort of my personal story here. So when like months before I retired, one of the ladies who worked at the telephone desk in the church, sweet woman, she gave me a box of paintbrushes and paint and paper, and she said, you should take up painting. And I thought, no. Others said, golf. I met a guy the other day, within the last week, a complete stranger, but I was at the country club, but I don't play golf. I was just having lunch with someone from the church, and he came up to us and introduced himself, and he said, I'm retired. And I said, what do you do all day? He says, well, I play golf 4 times a week, and that takes, and then I go to the bar afterwards with my friends, and so it's 6 hours, 4 days a week. Other friends of mine have farms. This is a South Carolina thing. They call it a farm. It's just a lot of wood and deer and gators and other things. But they have a hut, somewhere where they can shelter and probably get away from the missus. And they go there, 4 or 5 days a week. I wasn't prepared for some things about retirement. I wasn't prepared for the word retirement. Because although I've retired from being the senior minister of First Pres, I still work for Ligonier, I still work for RTS, and I preach every Sunday, somewhere. And it typically these days involves a flight. So my weekend is kind of busy. I know you want to hear my personal story. I realized 6 months before I retired from First Pres Columbia, I have 8,500 books. Ministers my generation bought books. Young ministers leaving seminary today don't buy books anymore. They do audio or something, but everything's online for them. But I grew up in an age where the physicality of having a book and making notes was important. And because there was no internet, if you needed information for sermon preparation about something, where would you get it? Well, these days you just Google it, and artificial intelligence will give you everything that you want to know and more. Right? So it's a completely different age. But I needed to know what was going to happen to these books. There are 2 seats, they're called Baptist seats at the front here, because Presbyterians don't sit in the front row. And
thank you, sir. Sorry to interrupt.
No. We're retired. We interrupt all the time.
Hey, that's right.
Our body causes me to interrupt. So in God's providence, we had 8 interns at First Columbia, and one of them wanted to start a study center. There are probably 15 or 20 study centers in the USA, Christian study centers. And we won't go into the details, but they bought a house and redid it. And I said to him one day, I said, what are you going to do about books? I mean, a study center needs books. I said, I've got the answer. I said, on 2 conditions, I'll give you my books for nothing. And the 2 conditions are that you take all of them. You don't rifle through and just pick out the good ones and leave me with the problem of trying to get rid of 2,000 books that nobody wants. So you take them all. And 2, I can come and study there anytime I want, within reasonable limits. So I have a room there, and a desk, and a lamp, and a chair, and all my books are there. And I go there 2 or 3 days a week to write. I did some research online, what people think about retirement, and it's fascinating and troubling in some way. That a robust and biblical work ethic is a hindrance to the enjoyment of retirement. So I read comments like this. I still feel guilty about waking up later than I did and not going to work. I haven't experienced that one time. Here's another response. My ingrained work ethic is looking for ways to be productive. Now that I can resonate with. I did not want my post First Pres Columbia days to be a couch potato. You know, if you watch golf on TV, it's 4 days. And there was, I'm not sure whether you know all about the Murdoch case in South Carolina, the lawyer who is now in prison. Well, his trial was on TV one day, on a Friday morning. So I made some coffee, I sat down, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was live on TV. At 5 in the evening, I was still sitting in the same chair. I hadn't moved. My wife had brought me a sandwich. I was completely riveted watching this murder trial about which he was found guilty. I know a lot of people, mostly men, to be sure, who've retired, and then 6 months later they go back to work again. So people ask me sometimes, what do I do now? And I say, I consult. I have no idea what a consultant is, but I consult. To understand retirement, we must first of all understand what the Bible has to say about work. We're barely a few hundred words into the Bible, and we encounter God's plan for us. Work. God said to Adam, before the creation of Adam's helper, we are told, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Later, after the fall, the work becomes difficult and sometimes fruitless. God cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. That was the curse. Not a curse on work per se, but a curse upon the fruitfulness of work. Now, Paul uses the same word. Adam's, in Romans 8, towards the middle of Romans 8, Paul says, Adam's disobedience brought about the futility of work. He uses a word that suggests emptiness, fruitlessness. The work is not only hard, but it doesn't fulfill. I've met people who are locked into their jobs. They loved it when they were in their 30s and early 40s, and then they were stuck. Now, Gen X, they hop from one job to another. People of my generation stayed in the same job from the day they left college and got a job until they actually retired. Right? So there are vastly different cultures out there, but I'm not talking to Gen X in here. Now, think about this. There was work for Adam to do in paradise before there was any sin in the world. Well, there was. I need to pull that back because the devil had already fallen. So there was sin in the universe, but not in Eden. God put a hedge around Eden, and in Eden there was no sin for a while. But there was work to do. Work, I said this earlier today about Luther. Luther had a vast emphasis on the idea of vocation. That it wasn't just priests who had a vocation, but everyone has a vocation. God provides gifts and He orders providence so that you can do, for the glory of God, work. And the work itself, now there can be sinful work, of course. People involved in industries and so on that are sinful. But the Reformation emphasized that farmers and woodworkers and metalsmiths all had a calling. You remember at the time of the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. 6 days of work and labor, and 1 day of rest. Well, how to interpret all of that in New Covenant language? And it's 5 days of labor and the weekend. You can't wait until Friday or maybe even Thursday evening if your job enables you to do that. What does Paul say to the Thessalonians? If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. I had a great uncle. We won't go into too many details here, but he never worked. He complained about his back and so on, but he was lazy. She worked. Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Whatever you do, work heartily. Well, I'm saying, first of all, before we can understand retirement, we need to understand that God calls us to work. So, from a biblical point of view, as I thought about it, it can't possibly be, I worked for 50 years, and then I stopped working. No, I just changed horses. I just do different kinds of work now. And it's work that sometimes has little or no remuneration. I had no idea how complicated Medicare was going to be. Or how many doctors refuse to take Medicare. So you've got the idea in the Bible that we are always working in some form or capacity. And maybe that work in the end is being a housekeeper. Looking after a loved one in their years of decline. That's my work. That's my calling now. It's not that I've stopped working. I'm just doing a different kind of work. The Bible says nothing about the modern concept of retirement. It's set in a totally different world. A Mesopotamian world, a Persian world, a Greek world, a Roman world. All of these biblical cultures had very different concepts of what life looks like. But there's little or no sense in which there's retirement, meaning I stop working altogether. I do nothing. So what biblical principles do we have to guide us? So I've reached that stage where I can't stand for a long time, so please come and sit down. If you need it, yes, in the back. Are you okay? Okay. I was just offering a chair. A chair is a very good thing at my time of life. No. So the first and most obvious is the doctrine of the fall. So that Adam brought ruin upon us all. And we inherit Adamic sin, which renders us guilty before God. And though wonderfully the gospel cures and that curse and sets us free, it doesn't prevent the curse of death and the wear and tear that age brings with it. I cannot do now with the efficiency I once did. Everything is harder. Everything is more difficult. Aches and pains. The inability to spring from a squatting posture to an upright one without groans. pains we never had before. The reminder that here we have no continuing city, but we seek that which is to come. So most of us in here are no longer 32 or 33. Thomas Aquinas in a catechism surmised that the redeemed will rise in the resurrection body that will mimic the age of 32 or 33 that Jesus was when he died. That's pure conjecture. But there'll be no growing old in the new heavens and new earth. There'll be no Medicare to have to deal with. Some of you can feel for Job in Job 30, the night racks my bones and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. We can enter, at least to some extent, into the spirit of his complaint. Our bodies simply can't keep up the pace if we force them to comply. Now, consider the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes 12. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, old age, and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. I used to enjoy doing X or Y, but I don't anymore. I'm adding to what Solomon said, you understand. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after rain, when things are not as clear as they used to be. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent, dowagers hump, kyphosis, and the grinders cease because they are few, you've lost your teeth. And those who look through the windows are dimmed, failing sight. You don't see as well. And the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low, deafness. You know, my wife now wears two, what do you call them? Hearing aids. And one rises up at the sound of a bird, sudden noises that make you afraid. And all the daughters of song are brought low. Music that once held you captive no longer charms as it once did. They're afraid also of what is high, lightheadedness. And terrors are in the way, real or imaginary fears. The almond tree blossoms. You turn white. Your hair turns white. That's what he's talking about. If you've got any hair. The grasshopper drags itself along. You need a walker now. My wife has a walker. You need a cane. Desire fails. Well, we won't go into that. Because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. It's just something, the cord snaps, you die, and it falls to the ground. It's just a metaphor, I think. You know, who knows how long we have? I think these days, I'm in my early 70s. My mother lived till she was 93. My grandmother was in her 90s when she died. My grandfather on my father's side was in his 90s when he died. So I've good genes for sure, and my wife. But I've said to my wife, look, if we're going to do stuff, stuff that we can do in all good conscience. We've worked hard. We've put some money away. Not enough if these tariffs don't stop. Don't look at your 401k just now. I made the mistake of looking at it, and it was horrible. But you know, I said to my wife, look, we've got 5 years, maybe 10, in which we can travel, do stuff, and do stuff in all good conscience, not frown about pleasure. There's a doctrine of pleasure in the Bible. God made us to enjoy His world, His creation. He wants us to see it if we can, if we're able. So we've planned some travel. I discovered, this is probably way too much information, but I discovered a life insurance policy that I had when I was in Britain 30 years ago, which I'd forgotten all about. I mean, completely forgotten all about. And we were trying to get rid of some stuff, you know, starting the process of downsizing, because we were in a house that's way too big for 2 people. And I discovered this policy, and I called the number in London, and I said, you know, I've just discovered this policy. I haven't paid anything in 30 years. Is it worth anything? Oh, yes. So my wife and I went on a cruise that left Australia and went anti-clockwise around New Zealand for 2 weeks. It was fabulous. Beautiful, beautiful country, New Zealand. And they speak English, which helps. And their food, I resonated with their food because it's kind of bland and it's kind of British. So work and rest. That's the rhythm God gave. And even in what we call retirement, I don't really like the word. It's too big of a word. I've stopped doing what I once did, but now I'm doing other stuff. At the age of 88, Jim Packer wrote a book about aging. Some of you might have read it. It's a beautiful little book. It's very, very short. And using what is probably a British or Canadian expression, he writes about living flat out for God. My contention is that so far as our bodily health allows, we should aim to be found running the last lap of the race of our Christian life, as we would say, flat out. With all of your might. Yeah. One of the things that you can do is encourage younger generations. I know they're dismissive of old people. You know, and there's an arrogance sometimes about certain generations. But in church, I have a grandson, he's 16. He can talk to people who are in their 80s without hesitation. He'll sit down and he'll just talk to them. It's a wonderful gift that he has. I'm not sure that I would have had that gift at 16. It would not have been my instinct to have done that. Part of our work is demonstrating to a younger generation what it means to run the race to the very end and to run it well. That is such a ministry. It's such a work in the church. Paul would have been in his mid-60s or so when Nero executed him. He didn't experience the debilitating effects of aging. as did the Apostle John, who might even have been 100. He was, without a doubt, in his late 90s. John was a teenager. He was probably 17 or 18 when he was called to be a disciple. You know, he tells the fact that he outran Peter to the tomb because he was younger. Right, and John is the only one of the apostles who wasn't martyred. And lived until we read of John being carried about in the streets of Ephesus, saying, because he couldn't walk anymore, saying, love one another. Love one another. I was in Ephesus just a few months ago, last fall, on a Ligonier trip. I was the speaker, so I didn't pay a dime. It was a Mediterranean cruise. It was meant to go to Israel. That didn't happen. It went instead to Istanbul. But it also went to Ephesus in Turkey. And Ephesus is fairly near the coast. You remember in Acts 20 when Paul meets with the elders, they walk down from Ephesus to Miletus on the shore. It was fabulous. If you have the opportunity to go to Ephesus, I mean, the excavations that they've done of the library, of the amphitheater, maybe a row of 50 little stores selling whatever along a street. Absolutely fabulous. And I could just imagine John, of course, Paul was in Ephesus for 2.5 years, almost 3 years, lecturing in the hall of Tyrannus, which they can pinpoint it was here, right beside the library. I imagine Paul walking in and out of the library. Well, my point is, since we don't serve an earthly master anymore in the way that we did, it provides for us and our spouse, at least for a period, an opportunity to also enjoy the benefits and privileges of this world that God has created and do some traveling. Well, let me suggest some principles that seem appropriate on how to live a God-honoring retirement. 1, find something useful and God-honoring to do. We were never created or redeemed to amuse ourselves to death. So volunteer in some capacity, maybe at the church, maybe at some center that needs help, maybe at a blood bank. To use that time in a God-honoring way. Be careful lest you find yourself too busy to do other things that you want and need to do. Your body will tell you, slow down a little. And there may come a time when your body and mind will prevent you from accomplishing the things you wish to do. So don't leave off for tomorrow what can be accomplished today. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. James is quoting a proverb. 2, plan. I've had these fascinating conversations over the last year with folk who made no plan whatsoever. They just woke up one day and thought, I'm tired of this job. I'm going to quit. I'm going to retire. But they didn't have a plan. Proverbs 21, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Consider a project that'll take a few years to accomplish. Write your memoirs. Write down the stories that have been important to you and give them to your children and grandchildren, because they're going to forget them. Now, some plans may fail because they're not the Lord's plans. But few things are accomplished that weren't planned. Without structure, life collapses into a kind of hedonism. So that was my fear. I needed a plan. I needed to know what did, at least these early years, post-senior minister look like. And it looks, for me, it looks like study center. I'm writing a book on the life of John, a sequel to this one, the life of Peter. And at the weekend, I'm traveling and preaching. Now, it's a season. The traveling will get too much after a while. I live in Colombia, so everything goes to Atlanta. I could walk through Atlanta Airport in the dark. I could get from Concourse A to D in the dark. I have been there hundreds and hundreds of times. But for a season, I'm helping a little church, 50 members, most of them gray hairs like us. It's a dying church in a dying town, but they need some help and comfort. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. It provides structure, plan. 3, consider retirement to be a season for getting to know God even better. You've got more time now to read the Bible. You have more time to pray. I met a man 2 months ago, 3 months ago in Oklahoma. I was in a church, preaching in a church in Oklahoma. This man came up to me. He was 50-ish. And he said to me, you know, I pray for 10 people every week and you're one of them. I've never met this man in my life. I had no idea who he was. He said to me, I pray for you every day. I have a little book and I have 10 people that I pray for, 10 preachers that I pray for, and you're one of them. And I thought, wow, I was awed, I was humbled. I couldn't believe it. I called Rosemary, my wife, and said, do you know that there's a man in Oklahoma who prays for me every day? What? Well, you could do that. Your favorite chair. You know, you don't want to become a couch potato, but you can take a little more rest than you used to. But it's rest and work. Rest and pray. Rest and read Scripture. Good Christian books. My working days used to be filled with all kinds of busyness. Text messages coming every 10, 15 minutes from somebody in the congregation or one of the 5 pastoral staff. And I wasn't prepared for how sudden the change would be. I went from, my calendar was full to no appointments today. It took me a while. It took me 6 months, I think, to sort of get into that and accept that. So even to old age and gray hairs, the psalmist says, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come. There's a place, this is another point, there's a place for leisure, I think you say leisure. There's a place for leisure and pleasure. See, in British English, they rhyme. Leisure and pleasure, not so much, but leisure and pleasure. I commend joy, Solomon says, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. So I have a group of friends, 3 or 4 of them, and we meet together on a fairly regular basis, and we go on trips, historical trips in South Carolina. And we go and visit churches and graves, and we were in the woods last week I was terrified about chiggers because I've had chiggers in the past, and they go to places where they should not go. And so I had put tape around my socks and my trousers to make sure the chiggers didn't get up there. But we were looking for a grave in the middle of the woods and found it. Finish well. Paul said to the Philippians, brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And I don't know, do I have 20 years? Do I have 10? Do I have 5? I hope it's not 30. I don't want to think about those declining years and what that might mean, but finish well. The book of Hebrews says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Run with endurance and don't stop.